On the freezing night of April 14, 1912, over the Atlantic Ocean, SOS signals were transmitted that the RMS Titanic, the most perfect ship in human history at that time, was encountering a disaster. After the incident, the Titanic had only a few hours left before being swallowed by the ocean. What happened next, we all know to some extent. Over 100 years have passed, and the details of the tragedy have been mentioned numerous times in the media. Every second and every minute of the tragedy has been depicted in numerous films and research works. It seems like there is no longer any information related to the accident that remains a secret. But that's not entirely true. There are still things we don't know. Mysteries lie deeply beneath the ocean floor along with the century-old ship. And today, we are the ones to uncover those secrets. No doubt, during the early 20th century, the Titanic was indeed an icon of the extravagance that humanity created. The colossal ship was filled with all the most luxurious amenities that anyone would desire to enjoy. But perhaps because it was too extravagant, Mother Nature also wanted to partake in this pinnacle achievement of humanity. The supposedly unsinkable ship, in the end, found its resting place beneath the depths of the ocean. What happened to the Titanic? A multitude of theories has been put forth to explain the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. However, in some way, they all seem to suggest that the fate of the ship was somehow predetermined. On April 10, 1912, the world's largest ship, RMS Titanic, powered by steam, embarked on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. As the ship left the dock, another vessel in the harbor suddenly steered directly towards the Titanic. The two ships were only about 20 centimeters apart, on the verge of a collision. However, by some miracle, both vessels managed to avoid the impact. Many people considered this incident an ominous sign, a warning of a larger impending disaster. On the second day of the journey, the Titanic arrived at Queenstown Port in Ireland. Here, hundreds of tons of provisions, as well as beverages, were loaded, along with an Egyptian mummy. It was the mummy of a high-ranking Egyptian woman from the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep IV. The mummy was owned by a British police officer and was brought to New York to be sold to a wealthy businessman. Titanic received its final passengers in Ireland before leaving the port. Now, the number of people on board includes 885 crew members and 1,316 passengers, making a total of 2,201 individuals on the ship. People say that buying a ticket on a ship like the Titanic is akin to purchasing a ticket to paradise. The Titanic embodies all the achievements, technological structure, and creative intelligence of humanity in the 20th century. It was the most expensive ship ever built in history. $7.5 million at the beginning of the 20th century was not a small amount. The colossal Titanic had a height measured from the keel to the top of the smokestack equivalent to a 14-story building. It was constructed by over 3,000 skilled workers and engineers of the finest expertise at the Belfast shipyard. Titanic had 8 large compartments, 4 massive smokestacks, and a unique and unparalleled safety assurance system, taking more than 3 years to complete. White Star Line, the company that owned the ship, even asserted, even God himself could not sink the Titanic. Every detail in this place feels like a meticulously crafted masterpiece. Perhaps this staircase is the clearest evidence of the true class of an authentic first-class cabin. The music, the elegant ladies, and the premium wine. I don't think there could be anything more extravagant in the middle of this ocean. And here is the result of the supposedly unsinkable ship, contrary to what people said. After more than 100 years lying beneath the ocean floor, 3,800 meters below sea level, the Titanic has lost the luxury and splendor that once defined it. Countless signs of corrosion from the passage of time cling to the ship's hull, in a scene of wreckage where it's hard to perceive anything of its former grandeur. Some scarce images of the wreck of the ship may not contain much information, but they also allow us to interpret a few things. One of those theories is that the Titanic was hit by a German submarine during World War I. This could have happened. However, after exploratory expeditions to the wreck of the Titanic, scientists have asserted that the Germans were not involved in this incident. In fact, the Titanic was punctured after colliding with an iceberg. The fragmentation caused the ship to lose its structural integrity as it sank to the ocean floor. In the early 20th century, the American economy was booming, and global migration to the United States for a better life was occurring. The United States needed a cheaper and more abundant labor force to fuel its economic growth. Certainly, our laborers couldn't afford to buy a first-class ticket on the Titanic. The price for a spot in this class was $3,100, equivalent to about $200,000 today. It was an amount that poor laborers of that time would have to spend their entire lives working to achieve. The extravagance and wealth of the first-class cabins were reserved for the aristocracy. In contrast, in third class, the cost for a berth was $32 at that time. However, all these distinctions meant little when everyone aboard only had one life. On the Sunday night of April 14th, the temperature dropped to near freezing. The sea was completely calm, the sky was clear, and there was no moon. The Titanic was still moving. Captain Edward Smith perhaps took precautions in response to iceberg warnings received through signals in the days leading up to the incident. The Titanic altered its course about 18 kilometers southward. While this caution was commendable, it proved insufficient. Earlier, at 1345, a warning from the steamship SS America informed that there were large icebergs south of Titanic's route. However, the warning was directed to the Marconi wireless room and was not forwarded to the ship's bridge. Late in the evening at 21:30, another report about numerous large icebergs in the Titanic's path was received by two radio operators, this time from another ship. However, this warning also failed to reach the captain. The on-duty personnel in the information and meteorology room simply thought that these warnings were unnecessary to relay to the ship's captain, because they were not sufficient to make people consider slowing down or altering the course of the ship. The Titanic had 3 lookout teams on the observation deck, and they rotated shifts every 2 hours. In any nighttime circumstance, it was almost certain that they had to promptly observe and spot icebergs. However, they had forgotten that the weather was not as predictable as they thought. The sky was moonless, windless, and without binoculars, and the dark side of the iceberg was facing towards the ship. These factors indeed rendered the observers practically useless. At 11:39 p.m., while in the Newfoundland region and eastern province of Canada, the lookout personnel noticed something unusual. It was an iceberg drifting, and the ship was heading towards it. They quickly rang the bell 3 times and made a phone call to the control room. Ensign James Moody picked up the phone. "Are you there?" Fred shouted. "Did you see anything?" "Iceberg, right ahead." The brief conversation concluded. Moody quickly relayed the information to Officer Murdoch. However, it seemed superfluous as the iceberg was already too close. Murdoch gave the order to turn the ship to the left. However, that small effort proved ineffective. 27 seconds after the lookout team reported the iceberg, the ship's starboard side collided with the iceberg, causing the rivets below the waterline to burst out. Seawater rushed in through the openings into the compartments. Of course, the Titanic had an excellent system of pumps to remove water. Everything would have been fine if only about 4 compartments of the Titanic were flooded. However, the impact was too severe, and water flooded into 5 compartments, exceeding the number that the Titanic could stay afloat with. The senior officers, along with Captain Smith, knew that the Titanic was certain to sink. They had to confront the reality of not having enough life jackets and lifeboats for everyone on board. At 12:05 a.m., 25 minutes after the collision, Captain Smith ordered the preparation of all lifeboats. There were only enough spaces for half of the passengers on the ship. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, with a total capacity of 1,178 people, out of a total of 2,201 people, including passengers and crew. People argue that the Titanic was too arrogant for not carrying enough lifeboats. However, in reality, it carried more lifeboats than the required standard set by the British Board of Trade. At that time, the necessary number of lifeboats was determined based on the total tonnage of the ship, not the number of people. Regulations regarding lifeboat capacity were last amended in 1894, when the largest ship had a total tonnage of only 10,000 tons compared to Titanic's 46,328 tons. In the hour of peril, everyone crowded onto the ship's deck with the hope of survival. Passengers in first and second class had easy access to the lifeboats. However, those in third class were not fortunate enough. While the majority of women and children in first and second class survived the ship's disaster, the majority of women and children in third class perished. The two telegraph officers continued to send distress signals continuously, and eventually, some ships responded. The nearest ship took 4 hours to reach the Titanic, which was an excessively long period of time. The land-based wireless stations also received distress signals from the Titanic. One was the wireless station at Cape Race, Newfoundland, and the other was the wireless station at the top of the Winnebago building in New York City. Immediately after the distress signals were sent, continuous information was transmitted from one ship to another. People rushed to the White Star Line offices in New York to monitor the fate of the ship. At 2 a.m., the Titanic was gradually sinking. However, it seemed that passengers were reluctant to board the lifeboats. The Titanic was warm and appeared very safe, and at that point, there were no outward signs indicating a major danger. As the ship tilted noticeably, fear began to set in. The ship's propellers began to rise above the water, and water started to pour into the captain's quarters. At that point, Captain Smith allowed the two telegraph officers to cease their duties and seek survival. At 2:18 a.m., water flooding down caused the glass dome to shatter. The electrical system failed, and all the lights went out in an instant. All the boilers were completely submerged. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic sank completely. Immediately after the tragedy, investigations from both the UK and the US concluded that the ship was traveling too fast. If it had been moving at a slower speed, the accident might not have been as severe. Moreover, Titanic could have entirely avoided the icebergs. In that case, the collision would have only ruptured 4 compartments, and the ship could still have remained afloat. After the Titanic sank, alongside the prevailing sorrow, rumors and speculation about peculiar occurrences during the tragedy began to circulate. To this day, there have been numerous theories surrounding the ship's sinking, including mysterious and unexplained hypotheses. In 1898, the novel Futility by author Morgan Robertson depicted the demise of a ship. The author named the ship Titan, and the story's events occurred 14 years before the sinking of the Titanic. In April 1912, after the tragic sinking of the Titanic, people discovered the uncanny similarities between the Titanic disaster and the plot of the fictional work, Futility. It was a cold April night, and the ship, with a length of 243 meters and a displacement of 45,000 tons, carrying 2,500 passengers, was considered unsinkable. It was gliding across the surface of the vast ocean. Afterward, the ship suddenly collided with an iceberg on the starboard side, while moving at a speed of 46 kilometers per hour. The ship was 740 kilometers away from Newfoundland. It sank rapidly, and due to an insufficient number of lifeboats, the majority of passengers went down with the ship into the ocean. However, this is not a description of what happened to the Titanic. That's right, it is the content from the novel we are referring to. The similarities between the Titan and the Titanic go beyond just a name and an iceberg. There are many other details. The length of the two ships is quite similar, with Titan measuring 243 meters and Titanic 286 meters. The speed at which Titan struck the iceberg was 46 kilometers per hour, while Titanic's speed at that time was 41 kilometers per hour. Titan carried 2,500 passengers, and Titanic carried 2,200, even though both had a capacity for 3,000 people. Both ships were owned by British companies and collided with an iceberg on the starboard side around midnight. Additionally, both sank in the North Atlantic Ocean, about 740 kilometers from Newfoundland. Despite some differences, they share many similarities. For instance, the sinking of the Titan left only 13 survivors, while the Titanic had 705 survivors. The Titan capsized before sinking, whereas the Titanic split into 2 parts. After the Titanic tragedy, author Robertson was even regarded as a prophet because his work resembled the actual events to an unbelievable extent. The likelihood of someone writing a book similar to a tragedy that hadn't occurred yet is extremely rare. The Atlantic Ocean is vast, covering 106 million square meters. Yet the sinking location of the Titan in the novel coincidentally matches the sinking location of the Titanic. Not stopping there, the Titanic is believed to be associated with many more mysterious and supernatural stories than we know. Do you recall the incident when the Titanic nearly collided with another ship just before leaving the port? Indeed, many people had a sense that there was something amiss with this ship. A few hours before the ship left the dock, about 55 people refused the journey for various reasons. Later, 16 of those who survived the tragedy mentioned that on the fateful night, they dreamt of the ship sinking. Until now, the cause of the Titanic sinking remains a focal point of scientific debate. Among them, a famous and somewhat mystical explanation is the curse of the mummy. That's correct, that mysterious mummy we mentioned at the beginning of the video. Around the year 1900, archaeologists excavated a stone sarcophagus from an ancient Egyptian tomb. On the sarcophagus was inscribed a curse that read, "Any person who disturbs this coffin will face misfortune and will be swallowed by the sea." At that time, people didn't take this curse seriously, believing it was merely a threat aimed at tomb raiders. Consequently, they opened the sarcophagus and found an ancient mummy inside. After examination, the mummy was determined to be thousands of years old. Afterward, this sarcophagus, along with the mummy, was transported to the United Kingdom. Shortly after, it was purchased by a wealthy entrepreneur with a passion for ancient Egyptian culture. Not long after the acquisition, 3 members of this wealthy entrepreneur's family were seriously injured in a car accident. The entrepreneur's mansion also mysteriously caught fire, seemingly orchestrated in a premeditated manner. After these events unfolded, the entrepreneur became greatly frightened and donated the mummy to a British museum. However, those who had been involved in the previous excavation work continued to pass away mysteriously. For safety reasons, the British Museum moved the coffin to a different location and ceased its display. Subsequently, the museum handed over the mummy to a collector who promptly sought assistance from one of the most renowned witches in Europe to perform an exorcism ritual for the mummy. However, it had no effect. The witch stated that the mummy contained a substantial amount of demonic energy that couldn't be exorcised, and gave sincere advice that it should be removed as soon as possible. At that time, no museum was willing to accept the mummy. Over the course of about 10 years, up to 20 people lost their lives because of it. The information about the mummy somehow crossing the ocean and being purchased by a wealthy American entrepreneur. Coincidentally, the Titanic turns out to be the vessel responsible for transporting this mummy. On June 18, 2023, the exploration ship Titan of the OceanGate Company embarked on a journey to explore the wreckage of the Titanic. Unfortunately, that expedition claimed the lives of all the members of the exploration team. It seems that the remains of the victims may never be found. Titan is not the first ship to encounter mishaps. The Titanic exploration expeditions in 1991, 1995, and 2000 all experienced incidents that could have cost the lives of those aboard the ship. The legendary ship Titanic's location is approximately 550 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, at a depth of 3,800 meters beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Only 10 submarines in the world are believed to be capable of reaching such depths. The CPC report indicates that even ships that have undergone rigorous inspection procedures have encountered difficulties when diving into the area where the Titanic sank. The crew of the 1991 expedition from Canada, Russia, and the United States also experienced a heart-stopping moment when their diving vessel got entangled in debris from the Titanic itself. In the end, they had to rely on the assistance of another ship to provide support. Another incident occurred 4 years later, when Hollywood director James Cameron got stuck in a sandstorm sweeping the seabed in 1995. The director was in the process of filming the wreckage of the Titanic for the blockbuster film Titanic, released in 1997. During Cameron's submersible's struggle against the fierce currents, the power supply began to run low. The sub attempted to surface immediately, but it felt as if it had hit a 20-meter-high wall, only to be pushed back down to the seabed. Similar incidents occurred when they attempted again. They had to wait in darkness, with temperatures near freezing, for the batteries to recover. In the third attempt, They managed to surface successfully after 5 tense hours. The near-death incident occurred in 2000 when science journalist Michael Gillen had the opportunity to visit the Titanic. A water current lifted the submersible and slammed it into one of Titanic's propellers, causing the submersible to get stuck. After an hour of rocking back and forth, under the skillful control of the Russian Captain Victor, the submersible maneuvered out of the entanglement and was able to resurface. The recent incidents and accidents may be just human errors, or they could be true omens for the curses surrounding the legendary Titanic. Whatever it may be, perhaps we should still let the Titanic rest peacefully at the bottom of the ocean. Its fate might have been predetermined, and no one should interfere with that.